It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, so you've sent in a bunch of stuff about tariffs and Trump, things like Liberation Day and tariffs Trump as search terms, and this article called The Trump Tariffs, A Legacy of Trade Disruption and Economic Debate. So pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, really fascinating. It looks like we've got a pretty wide range of material here to dive into.
Yeah, for sure. So in this deep dive, we'll try to pull out the key takeaways and try to understand what all of this really means.
For sure.
Particularly like in the context of Donald Trump's presidency and, his approach to trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you've given us is like a really good cross-section of information about like a super important time for international trade.
Absolutely.
We're going to, really dig into like the reasons behind these tariffs, what happened because of them, how the economics and politics all shifted.
Right.
And even, that phrase Liberation Day. We'll look at that too.
Yeah.
We really want to give you like a clear understanding of all of this, something that was really debated a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's get right into it. The big question here is, why were tariffs so important to Donald Trump when he was president?
Right.
Like, what was the thinking behind using them so much?
Well, the main reason the Trump administration used tariffs so much was this idea of America first.
Right.
It was all about putting American economic interests, above everything else.
Yeah.
And it really shaped how they saw trade agreements and relationships with other countries.
Okay.
So basically, America first meant that they believed tariffs could change global trade to benefit America, even if it meant like shaking things up a bit.
Interesting. So that America first idea then led to some very specific reasons for using tariffs, right?
They had a few key arguments they used all the time. One of the biggest ones was that they wanted to shrink the trade deficit.
Okay.
That's when a country like imports more stuff than it exports.
Right.
And they thought tariffs could help balance that out.
So they thought if you make imported goods more expensive, people will buy less of them and more things made in America.
Exactly. And that would make the trade deficit smaller.
Right. Okay, so another big argument was about protecting American industries, right? Especially manufacturing.
Yeah, that was huge.
Yeah.
They said that tariffs would protect those industries from cheaper competition from other countries.
Yeah.
And that would let them grow and create more jobs here in the U.S.
Makes sense, protect local jobs.
Right.
But then there was also the argument about national security, which seemed kind of different.
Yeah, that was a bit different. They argue that some industries like making steel and aluminum were crucial for national security.
Okay.
So they put tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to boost production here and not rely so much on other countries for those materials.
Interesting. And then there was this whole idea of reciprocal tariffs, which was talked about a lot. What was that all about?
Right. So the idea there was to pressure other countries to lower or completely get rid of their tariffs on American goods.
Okay.
So the U.S. would put tariffs on countries that already had tariffs on our stuff, kind of like a bargaining chip, to try and get them to remove their tariffs.
Okay.
The problem is other countries might not think their tariffs are unfair, and they might not want to get rid of them just because we pressure them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that could lead to like tariff wars where everyone keeps adding more tariffs.
Right, it's sort of back and forth.
Exactly. But the goal, in theory, was to make trade fairer for everyone.
Right. I see. So those were the main justifications for the tariffs. But what were some of the big concrete actions that actually happened?
Right. It wasn't just talk. They actually put some major tariff measures in place. Probably the most famous ones were the tariffs on steel and aluminum in 2018.
Right.
Like we talked about. They said it was for national security, and they put a 25% tariff on imported steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum from a bunch of countries, even close allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union.
Yeah, that caused some problems, didn't it?
It definitely ruffled some feathers. And then, of course, there was that huge trade dispute with China that went on for a while. What did those tariffs look like?
Yeah, that was a big one.
It wasn't just one thing. They put tariffs on goods from China in a few different stages, and it ended up covering like hundreds of billions of dollars worth of stuff.
Wow.
And it wasn't just one industry either. They targeted loads of things, machinery, electronics, consumer products, pretty much everything they imported from China.
Right.
And of course, China retaliated with their own tariffs on American exports,
Yeah.
which turned into a full-blown trade war.
Right. I remember that going back and forth, it was a big deal. And it wasn't just China, right? They also put tariffs on Europe for different reasons.
Yeah, that's right. They put tariffs on some European goods like wine, cheese, and other agricultural products.
Okay.
And that was mainly because of disagreements about subsidies for the aircraft industry. They said European governments were giving unfair financial help to their aerospace companies.
I see. And we should probably also mention the USMCA. What role did tariffs play in that renegotiation of NAFTA?
Yeah, so the USMCA was mostly about updating the rules of trade between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, and trying to make it easier to trade in many sectors.
Right.
But it did include some stuff about tariffs, especially for the car industry.
Okay.
Like, there were rules about where car parts could come from, which basically made it less attractive to import certain parts from outside North America.
Interesting. So we've talked about the reasons behind the tariffs and what they actually did, but what about the economic impact of all of this? It seems like there were a lot of different opinions and analyses at the time.
Yeah, it was definitely complicated, and economists are still debating the overall economic impact.
Right.
On the one hand, a lot of American companies that needed imported materials or parts ended up having to pay more because of the tariffs.
I see.
So their costs went up, which made it harder for them to compete both here and in other countries. And sometimes those higher costs got passed on to consumers.
Right. So if a company here was using imported steel to make construction equipment, for example, the higher steel prices meant they had to sell the equipment for more.
Exactly. And that could hurt their sales.
Well,
Or they might have to absorb the extra cost, which would eat into their profits. And we definitely saw prices go up for a lot of imported goods because of these tariffs, like everyday things like electronics or clothes.
okay. And like we said before, other countries didn't just sit back and do nothing. They hit back with their own tariffs on American goods.
Exactly. And those retaliatory tariffs, especially the ones on American agricultural products, really hurt U.S. farmers.
How so?
Well, made it more expensive and difficult for them to export their stuff to those countries.
Right. And what about one of the main goals they talked about, reducing the overall U.S. trade deficit? Did all these tariffs actually make that happen?
That's a good question. And the evidence is mixed.
Okay.
It seems like imports might have gone down a bit for specific countries or industries that were directly targeted by tariffs.
Right.
But overall, the U.S. trade deficit didn't really change much during this whole period.
Interesting.
And you have to remember, there are lots of things that affect a country's trade balance, not just tariffs.
So despite the tariffs, that big goal of really shrinking the trade deficit didn't really pan out.
Not really. It suggests the issue is a lot more complicated than just how much we import.
I see. And what about that other promise of bringing back lots of manufacturing jobs to the U.S.? Did that happen?
Again, it's not so clear-cut. Some industries might have seen a small increase in employment,
Okay.
but others, especially those that relied on exports and were hit by those retaliatory tariffs, might have actually lost jobs.
Oh, wow.
Economists are still studying the overall impact on jobs in the manufacturing sector. It's really tough to pinpoint the effect of just one policy when there's so much going on in the economy.
Right. So it sounds like the economic effects of these tariffs weren't exactly a clear success story, and they probably caused quite a bit of trouble internationally.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Domestically, like we said, there was a lot of pushback from businesses, farmers, and consumer groups who thought the tariffs were hurting the U.S. economy.
Right.
And internationally, there was a lot of criticism. Many countries argued that the U.S. tariffs were breaking the rules of global trade and messing up established trade flows. This led to a bunch of trade disputes and legal challenges at the World Trade Organization.
Which brings us to something that came up a lot in the sources, this comparison to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act from the 1930s.
So,
Why was that old law mentioned so often when talking about Trump's trade policies?
well, people made that comparison because both Smoot-Hawley and Trump's tariffs had the same basic goal to protect industries here by putting high tariffs on imported goods.
Okay.
But the really important difference is the economic context. When they happened, Smoot-Hawley was passed during the Great Depression.
Right.
And most economists think it actually made the global economy worse
How so?
because it triggered retaliatory tariffs from other countries and caused international trade to plummet.
Right. That's a huge difference compared to when Trump put in his tariffs. And the size of the tariffs was quite different, too.
Yeah, the actual level of the tariffs was a big difference, while Trump's tariffs were pretty high. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs were way higher, historically speaking. And because the economies were so different, a severe global depression versus a time of generally decent, even if it wasn't perfect economic growth, the potential consequences were just not the same.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about this phrase that popped up in your searches, Liberation Day. It seems pretty loaded. What did it actually mean in the context of these tariffs?
Yeah, Liberation Day was a phrase that was sometimes used when talking about President Trump's trade policies.
Okay,
It was basically meant to convey this idea of freeing American industries from what they saw as unfair trade practices and competition from other countries.
I see.
It was a way of putting tariffs sound like a good thing, a necessary step towards American economic independence and making American manufacturing strong again.
Interesting. And we noticed April 2nd appearing a lot in your searches sometimes, even with Liberation Day, like Liberation Day, April 2nd. Was that date important for tariff announcements or actions?
Yeah, the fact that April 2nd keeps coming up suggests that something important happened around tariffs on or around that date. Maybe they announced new tariffs, made changes to existing ones, or actually started implementing some.
Okay.
To figure out exactly what went down, we'd have to dig into news archives and official government records from that time. But it's pretty likely that some big tariff-related stuff went down on that day.
Gotcha. And there were also mentions of Rose Garden speeches. Why was that place so important for talking about trade policy?
Well, the Rose Garden at the White House is a pretty symbolic place. It's often used for big presidential announcements, especially those meant for the whole country.
Right.
President Trump often used it to give speeches about his trade policies, talking about why he was putting tariffs in place and the details of what he was doing.
Okay.
These speeches were usually broadcast live and got a lot of attention from the media.
So lastly, let's talk about how all of this was portrayed in the media and how the public might have seen these policies. It's probably safe to say there are different points of view.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The media covered it a lot, and it often reflected the political divides that were already there.
Right.
Like news outlets like CNN and Fox News often had very different stories.
Okay.
One might focus on the bad things that could happen because of the tariffs, while the other would talk about how they'd help American businesses.
I see.
Publications like the Wall Street Journal and The Economist gave more in-depth economic analyses, and they often worried about the long-term effects.
Right.
And of course, social media became a big place for people to talk about it, share their opinions, and argue about it, whether they supported the tariffs or not.
So to sum it all up, it seems like the Trump tariffs were a pretty big deal in the history of global trade.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
They marked a real shift towards a more nationalist and protectionist way of thinking about trade.
Okay.
Even though the stated goals were to shrink the trade deficit, protect American industries, and strengthen national security, the actual economic outcomes were mixed and are still being debated today.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt they caused some serious tension internationally. The idea of Liberation Day, whatever exactly happened on April 2nd or in those Rose Garden speeches, really shows how the administration wanted people to see these actions like they were freeing American businesses from unfair trade practices.
This has been really helpful in understanding this complex issue. It really shows how connected global trade is and how much impact policy changes like these can have.
It really does, and it raises a really interesting question for you, our listener. What do you think are the most important things to consider when deciding if trade policies that aim to protect domestic industries are successful or not?
That's a good question.
Are economic indicators the only thing that matters? Or should things like international relations and the impact on consumers also be considered?
Yeah, that's something to think about for sure. And for those of you who want to dig deeper, maybe check out the news from around April 2nd of those years to see what tariff announcements were made or research the arguments for and against reciprocal tariffs. There's a lot of information out there.
There really is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the stuff you sent in. It's been great talking about this with you.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
See ya.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No